and they're at it. Well, I believe that almost the entire space program, and I've talked to Nick Bajik about this, and he knows my theory, but he doesn't buy into it. That's no problem. That's fine. Everyone has their own take on it. In my opinion, all this microwave technology is precisely geared to trying to find a way to get through this. They've even had atomic bombs put up into the sky. I mean, it's an absolute fact. They've actually set off gigantic explosions in the ionosphere in order to do this. It backfired on them and actually made the ionosphere even more radiation.
Well, they've been doing that in the 60s. Up to about 6,000 nuclear bombs have been let off over the last 30 years. I've got another quick question. Please ask what Michael will be talking about at the Truth Conference in Manchester in June.
Probably I'm going to be doing post-humanism. It'll be a talk on what's to come after. We're moving into the post-human period, which is, again, my take on 2012. It's very different than what most people are talking about. I look at it as being basically the phasing out of human 1.0, if you want to use that terminology, and moving into a state in which we're moving into a very bleak post-human type of existence. This has been also a plan that's been going for years, and I'm going to probably talk on more of the ideology behind that, how that's been step by step, and what the actual ideology behind it is, which a lot of people have omitted. They know they know about the nuts and bolts of it, but the ideology is an occult ideology, which has a lot to do with the Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism and all of these kinds of philosophies, and how this has been steadily, a sort of a step-by-step process leading up to where we are now. It's a credible thesis that needs to be known. So given that I have enough time, I'll do a presentation on that.
Question for Michael. Have you any thoughts on the Mourne Mountains in Ireland and Tolkien?
Oh, yeah, well, Tolkien has always been one of my mentors. Obviously not physically, I never knew him personally, but from my earlier days, C.S. Lewis, George MacDonald, and Tolkien were very, very explicit, because I don't read their works as fiction, to tell you the truth. I read it in a completely different way.
Well, a lot of it must be allegory with the all-seeing eye of Sauron and genetic manipulation. I mean, come on.
Ultimately, it is. I think so. I would absolutely go for that, because
he lived about 3 miles from me, actually, in his later years.
No kidding.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean,
in a little bungalow down the road there.
All I can say is that his work had an enormous influence on me, and I think that he was very up to speed. Because remember, these guys, Tolkien himself was an expert in at least 22 languages of the world, and he had access then to the libraries in Bailey College and umpteen other universities. So
one thing I've noticed, actually, sorry to interrupt, but one thing I've noticed is that Freemasons often initialize their letter, like J.R.R. Tolkien. Was Tolkien a Mason?
That I don't know. I have no knowledge of that at all. I can't say one way or the other. I'm pretty doubtful that C.S. Lewis was, to tell you the truth, because I think he avoided anything to do with occultism and secret societies. For many years, he went on radio and had lengthy discussions with leading occultists and trying to, get into debates with them. So I kind of doubt that he might have been one himself. But you never know. It's really hard to say.
Earlier on, you spoke about the lascaux cave paintings. Some of the paintings of the animals are in Egypt, exactly the same 15,000 years BC. Sophisticated Nordic peoples who were residing temporarily whilst sheltering from the great cataclysms. These myths are the same in almost every ancient tribes, you say. You explain elsewhere that the accounts from thousands of different tribes around the world were discounted by the Royal Society, which I think is a Freemasonic arm of the Crown, and that Ignatius Donnelly used objective calendar dates because different cultures used the moon, the stars, or the sun.
Yes, that's right. The chronologies of the Egyptian pharaohs was deliberately skewed, and two people I recommend on that is L.A. Waddell, the Scottish antiquarian from the 19th century, who labored his whole life to synchronize the Indian, this is Vedic, this is over in India, what's called king lists. These people always kept king lists. His work was to synchronize, and he succeeded in doing it, the Indian king lists with the Sumerian king lists and the Egyptian king lists. They synchronize. And then the other man to mention is Emanuel Velikovsky, who also did the same thing. He tried to tidy up the chronologies of all the world, and he succeeded in doing it. with an eye to cataclysm. So what he did was he tried to synchronize the dates that showed that when you put them onto an objective calendar, all the different accounts of the various cataclysms throughout the world synchronize. They all talk about these cataclysms happening in and around the same dates. So this helped to change what the official history books were telling you, that there's no connection between these myths of, say, South America and China and so forth and so on, lying through their teeth, trying to break up the chronologies, tampering with the chronologies to make you think that there's no connection between one to the other, when in fact they were deeply connected. Yeah.
If you want to control the world, you control the information and especially the past, eh?
Oh, this is what it's all about.
Michael, do you have an opinion? I'm reading them from the chat box here. Thank you for all the questions tonight on the Free Truth Show, people. Michael, do you have an opinion as to what is happening now with the geological changes and the apparent subsequent changes in the planets of our solar system? Is the planet Nibiru, or is it something more sinister, say, by ETs?
No, I don't really have any focus on that, because to me, anyone who really knows my work notices that I'm more preoccupied by what's happening in human consciousness. That's not to say what does take place in consciousness ultimately will affect the globe. But I will say one thing. Do you remember a couple of months ago, probably it was last year, people remember that they tried to demote the planet Pluto to some sort of like rock and space status?
No, I didn't see that.
Well, yeah, the planet Pluto has always been considered important, astrologically. It's been one of the planets of our solar system. And then for some bizarre reason, last year, the powers that be tried to say it had no longer...
No, that's not important anymore. No.
That's right, and they demoted it, right? Now this has a lot of astrological and astromantic symbolism, and I knew why they were doing it. Well, Pluto rules plutonium. It rules destruction by way of radiation and any kind of atomic, consequences or phenomena, right? Look what's just happened today. We got a bit of a warning recently, didn't we, with a tsunami, which is, number one, is a cataclysmic event, like the person who's asking you this question. So we have a cataclysmic event tying into what? The potential and probably very real threat of the radiation from these nuclear power stations over in Japan, right?
I thought you might be coming to that, yeah.
Now, whether you like it or not, that is ruled by the planet Pluto. And you asked about what's happened, or he's implying what's happening now globally. Well, it's not so much what's happening on the Earth, it's what's happening in the archetypal realm. The planet Pluto is highly dominant right now in the zodiac, and it's moving a lot of things. It's actually in the sign of Capricorn, and that will cause a lot of upheaval. I've done a lot of interviews on this, and I've mentioned it many times, tying in that it's going to be one of the key factors in this whole countdown to 2012, the planet Pluto and what it's doing. And one of the things that one of the effects that it's having, here, and anyone can look this up in any coffee table book on astrology. Just go online and look it up. Pluto rules economics. What has been happening since the moment that it moved in this Capricorn is the moment we had the whole thing with the federal bailouts. And just a couple of months ago, the fall of the Republic, the whole idea of the banks going belly up. That following on from that, we have the complete meltdown of the American economy. And then we got now, following on from that, this consequence bringing in another aspect directly related to the planet Pluto, which is this fallout, radiation fallout. Then we even had the, remember the volcanoes that went off and blackened the skies recently where no planes could fly? That was like last year as well, which is all this dust in the atmosphere.
An actual hoax. There's no need to shut down European airports at all. It wasn't affecting the planes at all. That's
right. But these quirky and bizarre, almost natural, it's this guy asking this question to you is sort of jogged my memory on this. These events are basically ruled by the planet Uranus, which is, again, sudden upsets, changes, bizarre weather changes and what have you, and Pluto, which rules plutonium, nuclear, atomic fallout and atomic disaster, and also rules the whole concept of economy going up into upheaval. And then you find out that this very archetypal, or let's say just for layman's terms, planetary energy, they tried to demote it. This is an occult action to try and demote it, when in fact it's dominant in what's going on right now. So for those who are in the know and want to follow this up, check out Pluto, go to my 2012 page on the forum and get up to speed on this, because this Pluto is not finished yet, and it's going to have a lot more to do with what is going to take place in the next couple of years in the countdown 2012. So watch the planet Pluto, where it's moving. It's in Capricorn now, and that brings incredible upheaval. in the most physical and most established areas of our lives.
We ain't seen nothing yet.
That's right.
I'm off to Florence next week in Pisa. My question is, who was Machiavelli? And by that I mean, did he belong to any particular order? The Prince book seems to be a politician's handbook for long and protracted intrigue. The eugenicist handbook would be Plato, I guess. I've read The Prince, and I've noted from Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy that he wrote The Prince to please the Medici. It's interesting to note that even in those times, and I quote Machiavelli, the nearer people are to the Church of Rome, which is the head of our religion, the less religious they are. Her ruin and chastisement is close at hand. Well, perhaps he was wrong there. But perhaps, who was Machiavelli? It seems to me that any writer's work that's endured throughout time is authorised by the establishment, and those that aren't authorised, equally good writers, are dismissed and ruined. And I remember from our last interview you mentioned Ezra Pound, an equal of the greats, was locked in a mental institution. It's where we get the term Machiavellian, of course. Who was he?
I'm not up to speed too much on it. I do know that you're right, that, look, they'll take Giordano Bruno down to the Vatican Square and put a nail through his tongue, and then they'll promote some other dude, so that leads us to be suspicious. We know that the Medicis, who, by the way, were Judaic. The Medicis were completely connected to the Atmos groups that I talk about, and they're a very, very sinister organization, and so I would have great doubts about anybody that they employed. More traditionally, Machiavelli worked on his work for a long period of time. He was a secretary. He worked very slowly on the work. He certainly did not say that kings should be tyrants. He said that they should fear God, they should always operate in accordance with morality. But he also mentioned that when they don't, this is the kind of caper they get up to. And so it was basically a handbook to try and show a tyrant how to be what would be referred to as a benign tyrant. Because remember, in the days before democracy, and democracy is, in one sense, the biggest tyranny of all. It's the most unsustainable type of government system we have because it's nothing but...
Absolutely.
It's nothing but, as you know, plutocracy under a smile, and a very weak smile at that. But before you even had democracy, it was taken for granted that all men needed a leader, a father figure to look up to. So these handbooks, I don't care whether it's Sun Tzu or Clausewitz, another one in Germany, who's pretty much a Machiavellian, writing on how a ruler should rule, whether it was this Joseph de Maistre in France, who was another one, a lunatic, or Juan de Cortez is another lunatic. These people all over the world were Machiavellian type writers who absolutely believed in that might is right, and when right fails, first you try to do the right thing, but then when it fails, you obviously bring in the heavy mob and you rule by this tyrannical means, because they took it for granted. They didn't see themselves as tyrants at all. They took it for granted that all men are tyrants, and if anybody, any punk on the corner, if he gets the money and he gets the power, he's going to turn himself into a tyrant. And there's really good cause, when you know the psychology of human beings, to actually imagine that it's not imaginary. That has happened time and time and time again.
You mentioned that without philosophy there'd be no psychology, no sociology, and perhaps no Edward Bernays.
Yes, exactly.
Probably be a bad thing. I mean, having studied philosophy most of your life, and I might add, you yourself I regard as one of today's giants in this field. What role does philosophy have for society in light of the New World Order bringing 1,000-year, if not more, plan to fruition? Humanity can now escape its mental shackles for the first time in its history as more and more revelations come to bear. But how can philosophy enable us to traverse these monumental obstacles of the elite today?
Well, in one very simple, this is a huge question you're asking, so it would take umpteen interviews to answer, but in a very, I can always put it into a nutshell and say this. Do you remember in a couple of my presentations, I did mention that there's a strange paradox in human life, and that is we only have one short life, but we have infinite things to know. Remember? Do you ever remember me making that anecdote?
I think so, yeah.
I can't remember what talk it was, but at least in a couple of talks I mentioned that it's always struck me, and it is a problem if everyone thinks about it, that if we have infinite things to know, the
90 seconds.
The quest for knowledge is enormous, but we only have one short life to do it. Obviously, we can see that's impossible for one individual left alone. So where philosophy comes in, and of course under the umbrella of philosophy I mean psychology as well, is that because you don't have to do it all yourself, because men 50 times as intelligent as me have done it ahead of us. The Descartes, the Heideggers, the Kierkegaards, the Nietzsches, the Hegels, Plato. Philosophy is of massive importance because by at least spending a little bit of your lifetime to delve into their thoughts, a lot of the work is actually done for you. By coming up to speed on what other greater men have written, you are well on your way. So to abandon philosophy, before we even get into all other things I could say about it, by being completely ignorant of what these men spoke about, we are prolonging the growth, prolonging the problems of the world and of our own lives. Whereas if we at least have a healthy, objective study of philosophy and then, of course, psychology, what's happening is we're on that conveyor belt. We're moving at a faster rate because the greater minds, we are standing on the shoulders of giants whether we realize it or not. And that goes for technology, science, religion. All the questions have already been asked. All the questions.
Well, thank you, Michael. We've just got 10 seconds left. I want to thank my guest tonight, Michael Tsarion, and we'll have you back soon, I hope.
Thanks, Patrick. Sorry for all the hiccups earlier on, but I really appreciate the time your patience with us. Thanks a lot, mate.
Talk to you again, Michael. Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Good night, folks.